God bless you and welcome to another episode class session with Professor Babel. Today I just want to make a brief, basically an introduction. This could be a very extensive study, but we just want to give you an introduction, and it has to do with the etymological aspect of understanding words in scripture. For example, we want to look in particular at laws. What are laws? So, like other words in the Bible that we've spoken about, in this collection of books in Bible, you must remember that this is an ancient document. This isn't something that was just created. It's ancient. That means it's old. Now, it's interesting because unlike works like Homer and different ones, Shakespeare, it isn't just isolated for that time where you can draw some application to today. It is an ancient document, um, but its principles, its core foundational principles are relevant even to today's time. So even though it's an ancient document, it isn't a document that's stuck in the past. It's a document that provides for us today. However, we must understand it in terms of the fact that it's an ancient document. So some things that were stated were old, documents of the days of old. Okay, so to try to make some clarity, let's look at the idea of the subject laws. Now, what do we know about laws? There are a lot of laws. Laws is a word that's a loaded word. So when we look at scripture, you can't just say law or think of law and then in your mind have an idea what law is. There are different types of law. There are customary laws. Having traveled the world, I've been to different countries. If you go to like Tanzania, uh, you can um, you can be married at 12, but I think the marriage can't be consummated till the girls are 15. In other countries, they have laws where they can get married early. Even just in terms of marriage in the United States, there are some countries down south, if the parents agree, the children can be married at 16. That's a law. That's a customary law. That there's like the societal law, or a law that a society makes up. For example, um, here in the United States, for the most part, if you drive, I think the alcohol limit is 0.08. So if your alcohol limit is above 0.08, then you violate the law. You are considered driving drunk and can be cited or ticketed or whatever. So there's customary laws. Um, Same happened in the Bible days. Like today, there are societal type laws. There are there's other, when you think of law, you think of Isaac Newton, for example, law of gravity. You drop something, it falls. That's like a law or a guiding principle. Or you hear about laws like thermodynamics. What was the guy, Clausius, who did the first law of thermodynamics, which has to do with the transference of energy. And then was it Clausius and Kelvin that came up with the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy. Now, all of these you can find in scripture. Believe it or not, you can find the connection of all of these laws that these experts come up with. But the idea is that the law is a governing principle. In finance, we use a law. Give and it shall be given unto you. Investing, you find principles, laws in scripture. So when we think about the idea of law, just don't have one concept in your mind when you go to scripture and assume that that's what it means. For example, faith, the word faith, we kind of use that about everything. Have faith, 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 faith. There are several different meanings, at least a half a dozen meanings in scripture of what kind of faith. Is it saving faith? Is it the grace of faith? Is it the fruit of faith? Different kinds of faith. So we have to be careful when we think of faith. We're not just thinking of what we think faith is and not look at it in terms of context of scripture. World, we often assume when we see world, we know what they're talking about. But is it talking about that age or dispensation? Is it talking about the cosmos, the planet? So there's different meanings for different words that are familiar with us, but may be different in the original language. So in terms of law, and I'm not writing much Hebrew, but in terms of law, there are basically the basic concept in scripture that we see, other than all these other type of laws, is the moral law. That's your Decalogue, your 10 Commandments, basically, listen. There's ceremonial laws. Remember, they had the ceremonial laws and the Sabbath laws. Remember, like in Matthew, I believe, chapter 12, when David ate the showbread, and they were like, hey, you can't do that. There was an argument about the Sabbath. Is the Sabbath made for man, or is the man made for the Sabbath? You have customary laws, you have civil laws. So some of these can be interchangeable, but many of these are indicative of a societal norm. But in the Bible, the main law is the moral law, and that is like no other gods before God. Honor thy mother and thy father. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily like what they do, but you honor them. Thou shalt not murder. Kill is a bad translation. Thou shalt not murder. If someone is whooping on you and you push them and they hit their head and they die, that you didn't murder them. You killed them. It was self-defense. That's not sin. Murder, the intent is important. I'll give you the Hebrew later. So there's different laws. So just an idea of, let me see, I just wrote down a few. So we just have the concept of moral law. We have ceremony, Sabbath, law of gravity, Isaac Newton, thermodynamics, societal laws of drinking. I think Estonia is another place that allows young marriages. All of these ideas are just to give you a fact that there are different aspects of law. So I want to leave you with a question. Did you know that the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, written in Bereshit, Genesis, the first chapter, the basic law section of Ivrit, of scripture, your Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, in the Decalogue, in the Pentateuch, in this section of basic law of scripture, there is the 10 Commandments. And in the 10 Commandments, did you know that the 10 Commandments, not every single commandment is moral? Now, if it's a moral law, it's binding. It never changes. God is first. Love the Lord with all thy heart, all thy mind, strength. Never changes. But ceremonial laws change. It depends on the society. Cultural laws change. In Ivrit, in Hebrew, there are 613 laws. If you look at the Talmud and different sources, there are 613 laws, like commentaries on, and then there's commentaries on the laws. There are a lot of laws that we think of in terms of scripture, but the most important is for us to understand that moral laws don't change, but ceremonial laws change. Sabbath laws are not as binding as moral laws. There's your hint. But not all of the, if you look at the Exodus chapter 20 rundown of the Decalogue, and then Deuteronomy chapter 5, you will see mixed in with moral laws are ceremonial laws or customary laws or societal laws. And so it's important to understand when you're reading, to know what you're reading when you're reading it. And this is very important when you study scripture. So having discussed this concept of law, understand that there comes a time in the walk of a believer where you have to really think about what is a moral law that's eternally binding versus what's customary and ceremonial. Here in our country, we had people, family members, that went to jail over selling and buying marijuana, because the law at that particular time, not a moral law, but the law at that particular time said that that was illegal. Later on, the law made it legal. I guess there's a certain amount someone can technically have. But society kind of makes up these type of societal laws. And we have to understand that there's a difference. Every society will come up with every law. Some societies will justify certain actions as okay, but we have to be able to know what's required of us in terms of the law of God versus societal law. So we have to really think about the idea of law, understand that scripture is mixing different aspects of law. So not every law is binding, or understanding that like a moral law is higher than a ceremonial law. Not to say the ceremonial law was wrong, but there was a reason why the law was the way it was. So I hope that gives you an idea of understanding scripture and law. And so keep on studying, keep on moving. Thank you. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. All right. Until next time, God bless.